Thank you for tuning in to the NC Chamber's fourth episode of our podcast, Relaunching North Carolina, Perspectives from NC Business Leaders. The goal of this series is to make sure we're capturing and amplifying the voice of the business community as we move forward with reopening our state's economy and getting folks back to work. Today, we're honored to have with us Aubie Knight, Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina. He works with the board of directors to help set the strategic direction and vision of the association and leads the staff in implementation of the tactics needed to move the organization in that direction. Aubie is a past chairman of the Georgia Society of Association Executives and currently serves on the board of directors of the Association Executives of North Carolina. He is also a current member of the board of directors for TrustedChoice.com, National Alliance for Insurance Education, and serves as president of the Independent Agents Association Executives. A native Georgian, Aubie is a graduate of the University of Georgia and a huge Bulldog fan. He loves spending his weekend time with his wife and 5 daughters and participates in all things competitive, from triathlons to basketball leagues to mud races. You're really putting me to shame here, Aubie. It's enough for me to just take a walk around the block. But thank you so much for being with us today. I just want to dive into this and hear you describe your ties to the North Carolina business community.
Yeah, so first off, thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
And regardless of what I could put on my bio, the thing that always gets the most reaction is being the father to 5 daughters. So
yeah, I have 2, and that's enough for me. So
yeah, I understand. So as you mentioned in my bio, I'm a native Georgian, so
yeah.
I'm fairly new to North Carolina. I became the CEO of the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina in 2004. So
Okay.
I'm almost 6 years into my tenure in North Carolina. And prior to that, I held the CEO of the Independent Insurance Agents of Georgia.
Okay. Very cool. Well, welcome to North Carolina.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I love it
so
here.
far.
Yeah, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, 6 years is not an insignificant amount of time, but
Right.
to native North Carolinians, you're still a newbie. So
Right.
and,
Now, you
and
said
that's
2004. Did you mean 2014?
Yeah, did I say 2004? Yeah, 2014.
I think you did. But we cleared it up, so we're good.
All right.
So the focus of this podcast, as you know, is to discuss how COVID-19 has impacted the business community and to get your perspective as a business leader on how you think things are going in terms of reopening our economy. But before we get into the latter part of that question, just wondered how it's personally impacted you. I mean, just reading your bio, I know that you're a man who likes to get out and do things and connect with people and be active. So I'm sure it's impacting you in that respect. But let's hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, I mean, first off, I have to say that like most people, I'm very blessed that it hasn't impacted me in any sort of significant way in terms of a health challenge or being sick or having a loved one sick. I mean, I've known a few people personally that have been diagnosed with COVID, and they were all very minor cases, either asymptomatic or didn't need any more, you know, medical care than they had the cold or flu. So first off, you know, thanks be to God for that. That it hasn't been any serious any serious impact like that. You know, for me, it's more or less the standard stuff. I mean, it's more Netflix and less time going to the movie theaters, and you know, more cooking and less eating out. You know, that sort of thing. I have, you know, taken up a couple of new hobbies that allow me to, you know, social distance, because I love, I mean, like my weekends, generally speaking, I love being, you know, involved with people and being, you know, part of a big race, or going to a brewery and listen to a band, that sort of thing. So certainly have had to find some new ways to spend time.
Sure. And I'm right there with you. I'm like you said, I'm one of the lucky few that hasn't really been impacted that much beyond the social connection. But we know a lot of people who, like you said, who have either experienced it directly or, you know, have lost a job or, God forbid, have lost a loved one. Right. And you, at the helm of your organization, which I learned has more than 900 member agencies, which employ more than 7,000 people collectively. You know, you've got this network of people who no doubt are being affected by this pandemic. It's impacting everyone who either leads a business or works for anyone. So in your conversations with these employers, what have you learned? What have you heard? How is it impacting your members and their businesses?
Well, great question, and partly it's one that we're still trying to get an exact handle on. We're in the midst of a survey right now. I was just looking at the results of the survey. Where right now we're at only about 15% of our members have responded to the survey, but the vast majority of them are still dealing with a sense of uncertainty in terms of. Obviously there's been a big downturn, and how long is it going to last? And then once the recovery starts, once the things start reopen, how quickly will things reopen, and what percentage of businesses are going to be able to survive this, particularly the small businesses that that may not have the capital to survive an extended shutdown like they've been required to experience here.
Right. And this might be something that you're not able to answer yet, since you're in the midst of your survey, but do you get the sense that maybe your industry is a little bit more insulated from the negative impact? Yeah,
absolutely. Because I've been doing this for a long time, and the only thing from an economic standpoint that we can even kind of draw a comparison to is certainly the Great Recession and kind of what we went through in that 08, 09 to 10 and 11 period. And the insurance industry is generally going to be somewhat insulated from this. And so what that really means is there's kind of a ripple effect. People still pay their insurance premiums, and, businesses are still, have been still paying their insurance premiums by and large. But next year, sales are going to be down, number of employees may be down, number of vehicles that a business has on the road may be down. So all of those things will impact, the insurance premiums over time. They'll be paying less for their insurance next year than this year. In our industry, for insurance agencies, right now, the general consensus is that there's probably going to be a revenue contraction in the 6 to 8% range. Again, that's fairly, that's a fairly early prediction, and certainly subject to change.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because a lot of the people that we've spoken to, they're in the midst right now of dealing with immediate impact from COVID-19, whereas, like you said, some of your member organizations might not feel the true impact until next year. So that's a really interesting distinction. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure. There's a little bit of impact that's felt by insurance agencies right away, and that's when a lot of the disaster orders that were issued allowed for people to defer paying their premiums.
Yes.
And so when you don't pay your premiums, in that month, well then, the agency is not generating revenue that month. So there has been a little bit of disruption from a cash flow for some agencies, but by and large, there's a lot of insulation there, and it hasn't been as significant and as rapid.
Right. And it will definitely be interesting to see how things develop as time goes by. And, speaking of time going by, a lot of people are keeping their eyes on this horizon, hoping that restrictions continue to ease and that we can smoothly transition back to normal. But the more we hear from those in charge, the more it seems like that might not happen. This might not be a super linear path back to recovery. So is there anything that you would like to see change in North Carolina's response to COVID-19?
Well, this is this is a situation that's so complex that I'm not even sure hindsight is going to be 20/20 on this.
Great point.
It's super easy to be critical in times like this. The thing that I've absolutely, hated the most in terms of the government response to COVID has been, I guess, what I would consider to be the inequities of essential businesses in the shutdown. The devastation that this has caused to small businesses has just been horrific. The fact that I could go to any of the big box stores, I could go to Target, I could go to Walmart, and I could buy a volleyball, or I could buy clothing, or I could buy jewelry, I could buy whatever I wanted to there. but yet I couldn't go to my, to my locally owned jewelry store or clothing store. That's just, to me, that's just been inherently frustrating.
Yes.
That's been part of the, the shame in all this, really.
Right. And you bring up a great point. So, there's that immediate financial impact of not being deemed essential, but there's also that psychological piece, right? Of, just hearing that you're not deemed an essential business, that there has to be some sort of damage there psychologically as well. And that must be difficult to deal with. So yeah, that's a great point, Aubie. As someone who leads an organization with a really robust membership, and as someone who's had a lot of leadership experience over the years in Georgia and in North Carolina, what words of advice do you have for business leaders that are suffering right now, whether it's financially or just, with employee morale or with just the general uncertainty that's plaguing everyone?
Yeah, well, there is a lot to unpack in that question.
There is.
That's a really multifaceted question.
Yeah.
So
Sorry about that.
I'll try to break it down maybe into chunks.
Sure.
A little bit. I mean, certainly there have been some good things that have come out of this from a business standpoint. I mean, when I think about the level, the amount of innovation that this has driven, not only internally for our organization, but also, I mean, I've seen some of my member insurance agents that have been, a little slower to pick up on a lot of the, technology that can really help you operate more efficiently. I mean, immediately they had to pivot and turn around to adapt a lot of technology, whether that was, voice over IP phone systems. And, they've had to do things so that they could accommodate a workforce that was working remotely and still be able to service their customers.
Right.
So looking at, how you can improve your internal processes, make really smart investments in technology. We certainly had to, whatever your business plans were for 2020, they've been dropped on their head.
Absolutely.
For nearly every business. So we had to take a really hard look at, remember the why, right? What's our origin story? Why do we exist? But what's our fundamental purpose for being here?
Right.
And how do we need to pivot in order to continue along with that mission? But perhaps that means we're doing different things than what we're accustomed to doing. And so, being nimble, keeping a really close ear to what is it that your customers need right now, because what your customer needs, it's quite likely, changed a lot.
Sure.
So, I mean, we went from, our members, all of a sudden, they needed to understand what the best practices of remote work were and what the right technology tools were. And how do you hold a sales meeting and a staff meeting, and what do you do with your marketing in times like this? So,
right.
We immediately had to pivot and frankly, probably try to develop some expertise in some areas that we were trying to figure out ourselves. So, I mean, I think that's part of the answer anyway.
Absolutely. And it sounds like y'all have done a great job kind of becoming trainers almost and disseminating, resources amongst your members to help them be agile during this time. As someone who has a membership association, if you will, how do you keep their morale high, your member organizations? What's your messaging like? What are you doing to ensure that they remain optimistic during this pandemic?
Well, one of the things right now is we certainly are not going to be guilty of not communicating. But
sure.
I think communicating right now and communicating at a fairly high frequency is important, and certainly being very open and honest, transparent about our communication. And that goes not only with our membership, but with my staff. I mean, I've got a staff of 32 people here
right.
at the office, and
right.
And you talked about how do you ensure that they're optimistic. I would rather be honest than optimistic, and sometimes sometimes an honest assessment of the situation may not necessarily be all that optimistic.
Great distinction. Great point.
Yeah, but I do believe that honesty is key, and certainly you want to talk about the positives. You want to maybe highlight or accentuate the things that are going well and the things that are positive right now. As for the communication with our members, we are just making sure that we're staying on top of the relevant issues and letting them know that we're a resource.
Right.
I mean, we all, as an association, when we try to position ourselves as problem solvers for our industry, I mean, whatever problems insurance agents are having, we like to think that we have a very good solution and we have the resources to provide good solutions. Mm-hmm. And certainly, like right now, this is like a new problem. Right? This is a problem that is across the board. Everybody's having it. So how do we put together the solutions and the resources to help them best address this problem?
Right. It sounds like y'all are doing a great job of that. Sort of along the same lines of optimism. There's been a lot of tragedy. We know that. We hear about it every day, and it's a terrible situation for a lot of people. But what, if anything, has encouraged you the most during this pandemic?
That's a good question. I mean, there's, like I mentioned before, there's positives that have come out of this, but as far as actually encouraging, you have to look. I mean, that's something that I think you definitely have to be intentional about looking for things like that.
Yeah.
I think the performance of our healthcare providers and all of the frontline workers of essential businesses, I've been encouraged by that. I mean, the fact that, by and large, with the exception of toilet paper, our supply chain really held up. I mean, you talk about, a moment of panic. I mean, imagine the first time that you are going to the grocery store and there's no food on the shelves to buy.
Right.
I mean, that would be, you talk about discouraging. So the fact that we never really suffered any significant breakdowns to the supply chain, I thought that was awesome.
I agree with you, Aubie. I think we've been thrown this unparalleled stress test, and for the most part, by and large, North Carolina has passed it. I'm right there with you. I think we've done a great job, and again, kudos to all of our frontline workers and our healthcare workers, because
they're the fact that our healthcare system and our hospitals haven't been overwhelmed. I mean, I know that hospitalizations are right at kind of an all-time high right now, but even in that scenario, there's still capacity.
Absolutely.
Which is fantastic.
Definitely. A lot of businesses are facing that sharp decline in revenue, particularly in some industries like retail, hospitality. They're suffering greatly. What are some ways that, in spite of the financial hit that a lot of companies are facing, which is so damaging, what are some ways that businesses can continue to put emphasis on people and make their people a priority during this time?
Well, I'm a huge believer in culture, and culture starts with engagement, and engagement. A big part of that is going to be based in showing your employees that you care about them,
right?
And caring about your employers is it goes far past the paycheck.
Sure.
And I think that there are lots of things that can be done there, just in terms of health and well-being, and allowing people the flexibility and the time to take care of those things that are most important to them, like their families.
Right.
One of the big challenges that a lot of us have had to address is the fact that not only are we accommodating employees that are working from home, but we're also accommodating employees that are working from home that are now also full-time daycare providers, or also responsible for homeschooling their children. So making sure that you're allowing the degree of flexibility that you can, right? I mean, I don't care if my employees, if they're getting their work done, I don't care if it's, between 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock, between 6 and 9 in the morning, and then again from, 4 to 8 in the evening.
Yeah.
Whatever, being flexible and just showing your employees that you understand that there's, there are bigger issues in place and that have to be dealt with, and just, trying to be as accommodating and understanding as possible.
Definitely. Well, it sounds like your employees are lucky to have you at the helm, and hopefully other businesses take note in the application of that flexibility. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience with before we close out our session today?
No, I think you covered a wide range of things. I do. I guess one of the, in that long, multifaceted question, there was a part also about people that are struggling, and I guess the last thing that I would close with is, if you're struggling right now, don't feel like the Lone Ranger. I mean, a lot of people are struggling, so I would just be really, try to be assuring that a failure right now don't look at it as a personal failure. I mean, these are challenging times,
Right.
and it's a lot of people are struggling, but just, stay focused on what your customers need, and try to make whatever shifts that you can to best accommodate those. And I think we'll all be okay.
Really sage advice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Aubie Knight, Chief Executive Officer of the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina. Aubie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it. Hope you have a great day.